Hello. I have no audience. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a historian. I'm not even a political activist particularly. But in this election cycle, I am. I'm going to um, sketch a narrative for you that I think might convince someone to vote for Kamala Harris in uh, the US elections. Um, There might be like minor facts like dates or who was first or something that are incorrect. I'm not a journalist or historian or scholar. I really apologize. But the broad narrative and the basic facts and truths you should come away with, I believe are true and importantly true and convincing as to why we should vote for Kamala Harris in this upcoming election and defeat Donald Trump. This is particularly looking at LGBT issues. Now, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, overturning 50 years of precedent or so, the justices involved in that decision, I recall expressing a wish to overturn Obergefell v. Hodges, which was a 2015 case that concluded that the Constitution contains a right for gay people to marry as a form of equal protection under the law. Um, that would be quite a win for the Conservative Party, and would utterly undo the dearest hope of my life. Now, what does Kamala Harris have to say about this? Looking at her record, and what she's done for gay people, I believe she would do everything she could to prevent this coming to pass. In 2008, there was a California law, and she was in California at the time, called Proposition 8, which banned gay marriage, and it passed. And Kamala Harris was the Attorney General at the time in California, and she refused to defend it. And she filed a what's called an amicus brief in 2013, which, to my limited understanding, is sort of like an expert opinion, um, arguing that Proposition 8 was unconstitutional. And this brief and the larger case that it was part of succeeded, and Proposition 8 was overturned as against the state constitution, and gay marriage was possible in the state of California again. But almost more importantly to my mind, um, in 2014, she co-sponsored legislation that resulted in the banning of what's called the gay panic defense. Gay and trans panic is a legal argument that um, violent criminals use to legitimize and minimize the murder of LGBT people. An individual claims that they lost control and reacted violently because of an unwanted sexual advance. I've always known that this phenomenon is out there, and I want you to think, would you have approached that girl or boy that first time if in the back of your mind you knew that it was an effective legal strategy for that person to then stab you and say that your sexual advance was so horrifying that they went insane and that that had worked? Um, because that's how I grew up. Um, this defense is often, as I understand, successful at reducing, not dismissing the crime altogether, but at reducing the severity of the crime and at dodging hate crime legislation. Murders turn into manslaughters, things like that. And what that represents to me is that this defense, first of all, there's nothing behind that but prejudice. It's just valuing less the lives of the people who are harmed by violent crime if they're a certain sexual orientation or gender identity. And I bring this up because Kamala Harris in 2014's her co-sponsored legislation was banned this defense in California, and it was the first of its kind in the nation. This ban is not even close to national. And it's one of the reasons, among many reasons, why I would consider it unsafe to live in many American states as an LGBT person and try to build a life there. Only one traditionally Republican state has banned this insane defense. This seems to me to have the moral equivalence of being the first person, or let's assume like margin of error, among the first people to try to ban lynching. Like, this is a real thing that resonates with care for others, that builds up the value of others, that is tough on the people who are truly abhorrent and preserves human dignity. And I want you to arm you with that, because this is a time when hatred of gay people often becomes actual violence, and transgender issues are a cultural wedge. It's easy to be ignorant, especially on transgender issues. I myself have said some truly cringeworthy things, like 7 years ago or something, before I knew anything about the sort of stuff that they deal with. But, like, banning the excuse that you can just hurt them because they're weird seems like good fucking legislation for an attorney general and senator to advance. And I think that in this polarized time, someone with that perspective in the White House will be good for this nation. Um, there is a rise, a huge rise in hate crimes against LGBT people in the United States right now. Um, Almost unprecedented. Um, there's 30% more hate crimes against transgender individuals than there were last year, and last year was the highest on record. And there's 15% more against those with um, different sexual orientations, like mine. Um, and there is an unprecedented spike in anti LGBT legislation. More than 550 bills were introduced in 43 states, and more than 80 were signed into law. It is very popular right now to paint people like me as foul, abnormal, evil, dangerous, perverse, and people are getting hurt by it. Now, the FBI actually has said about this that, quote, the rise in hate crimes against the LGBTQ plus community is both shocking and heartbreaking, yet sadly not unexpected. The constant stream of hostile rhetoric from fringe anti-equality figures, alongside the relentless passage of discriminatory bills, particularly those targeting transgender individuals in state legislatures, created an environment where it was sadly foreseeable that individuals with violent tendencies might respond to this rhetoric. Does that sound like a presidential candidate that you know and a party that you know? The Republican Party and Trump have have started using the hatred of gay people just as it was used in Nazi Germany, in fascist Italy, in Soviet states, in current fascist Russia to fuel fascism in this nation. If Trump's party wins in in November, I apologize, we will have 4 years of even more accelerated rhetoric and legislation leading to the persecution and murder of gay people, just as has happened in other states. This is already happening. If this is to be stopped, we must do all we can so that Kamala Harris is elected to the presidency. Now, I wanted to be a poet once, um, and I was thinking about writing a short story and all of that, and I remember Charlottesville happened, where there was a far right rally in the United States, in which a bunch of essentially Proud Boy neo Nazis did that whole "You will not replace us" chant with torches in Charlottesville. And I went there. I got on a plane. I showed up. Not because I thought I would contribute. Honestly, it was for an aesthetic reason. I thought I could get a story out of it, right? And I wanted to know what was going on. But I was in that town when Donald Trump endorsed neo Nazis and he asked them to stand by, which indeed they did, and they tried to overthrow the government. And when I was there, half of the population of that town was out on the street and they were fighting. They were not letting these neo Nazis represent them, exert their will over them, exist there. It was not all right. And a lady, Heather Heyer, died. She was run over by a car by a neo Nazi. And rather than that being a national tragedy, Trump was like, whoops, I like Nazis. But those people were out there. They were on the street, they were chanting, they were standing up for democracy. And I want us to do that now. If we are anything like those people, if we are as morally courageous as the people who refused to let that rally go unopposed, now is the time. We have to do everything we can every day, if we can, to elect Kamala Harris, or we will have a dictator in office and people will die, as indeed they did in his horrific mishandling of COVID. Now, I am a nurse. I took care of COVID patients last week. And in the back of my mind, you do sort of wonder if those initial months had gone well, would we be in this situation? To this day, I have to persuade people to wear masks in the hospital, even if they have COVID. And just so much damage has been done. Anyway, I'm not prepared to do a whole speech on that. I'm just hoping that the that maybe this LGBT narrative, that things are getting much worse, and Kamala Harris has a profound and important and early record fixing exactly this problem. I hope that's persuasive to someone, and we'll get her an extra vote in November. Anyway, thank you for listening to this overlong speech.